Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to six-man working group. Please put your phone to silent mode. Fasten seatbelt. This session is being recorded. Please keep this in mind when you saying or doing anything in this room. This is Note Well, which I hope you've seen before. Please read it if you have not read it this week yet. And slides indeed are available on Data Tracker, so if the font is not big enough for you, you can download them there. Meeting tips. Yes, please use Meet Echo on-site client if you'd like to join the queue. Otherwise, the chairs have no idea you should be in the queue. And it also makes the meeting taker life much easier, so they know who is speaking. You can either open agenda on the website, or if you can use QR code scanner to scan this lovely thing on the left screen, and it will get you to the on-site tool and for this meeting. If you're using on-site, if you're joining Meet Echo from your device while in the room, please keep the audio and video off. Actually, that's applied to remote participant as well. And yeah, remote. We have we have one remote presenter, but yeah, people who will be commenting. Please, yeah, keep your audio video off until you're actually actively speaking. Okay, so we have a Jabber room. We have Meet Echo, obviously. We have on-site tool. Thank you, Shopping, for taking minutes for us. And as I said, yeah, we have all slides uploaded. We have a busy agenda, so I'm trying to be on time. We're going to spend about like 15 minutes talking about all these interesting documents we are producing. So, and David, you have a comment on this?
David Skenazy, IPv6 enthusiast. I have a potential agenda bash, but feel free to tell me no, because it's kind of selfish. On the second part,
Second part?
2 out of 3, the next slide.
Yes, we actually probably, yeah, yes.
So I have a conflict for the second hour, but feel free to tell me that I'm not special. Is there any chance you could flip the first 2 there? That would make my life easier. I really want to attend Brian's talk, but no worries if you can't.
We might actually need to do this because Ron is not online yet. We actually intentionally put Ron as the first presenter because of time zones, because he attending remotely. But if he does not appear online, we'll go straight to Brian's presentation. Yes. So yeah, back to agenda. We're going to talk about 2 working group drafts we have. And then we have a number of individual drafts. Some of them are actually, at least one of them actually currently in the adoption call, so it's in transition state. And we have a number of presentations in if time allows category. So yeah, we cannot guarantee anything, but we'll see. Document status. By the way, yeah, so David did his agenda bashing. Any other agenda bashing comments? 3, 2, 1 sold. Okay, let's talk about document status. We have not published anything since last IETF. We have submitted 3 documents to ASG. So one is being actively discussed by ASG right now, and we have 2 documents in the responsible AD queue. There is one interesting document which has been with ISG for a while, but my understanding is plan has changed, right, Bob?
Yes.
Yes, you, Eric, you want to comment on this? Yeah. Because yeah, it looks like we're going to have another draft which is on today's agenda, and there is another draft in HTTP-BIS, which is also related.
Yes, Eric Klein. So the first draft here is basically through telechat. We have one final discuss to resolve. We have ideas for some text. That discuss has rolled off with a change in the constitution of the ISG, but it would still be great to actually close with the discuss holder to the extent possible. So I don't think that should take too much longer before we can get it to the RFC editor. The next two are in AD eval, that's on me, and 6874 bis. So I was going to basically wait till today's discussion to understand, so people will understand why we're marking it dead, or I can return it to the working group and you can mark it dead. You can let it decline. But it is effectively dead for reasons that will become clear later, or we could have the discussion now. I'm okay with your agenda bashing. Murray said he could be here if we move it later, but he's got some other thing to do. He's in his own working group right now, so he might not even be able to be here. So it's probably better if you're here anyway. So bird in hand and all that. Anyway, yeah. I don't know if you want me to say anything more about that. That's some status updates.
Yeah, I think it'll come up as part of Brian's talk.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So this slide is not exactly accurate. So for source address selection, we did plan to close the last call before the session. However, it looks like a very interesting and productive discussion is going on the list. And it looks like there is a decision needs to be made what to do about those comments before we can advance the draft. So I do not think there are any problems with advancing the draft. We just need to agree, or the group needs to agree what the draft should say about this. So yeah, sorry, I was way too optimistic while making the slides. So for extension header draft, we would like to solicit an additional round. First of all, we'd like to ask for a volunteer for shepherding this document. How many people actually have read this extension header limit document? Oh, so we should have a lot of. Okay, who cares about extension headers? So anyone would like to be a shepherd?
Yeah, vote please.
Oh.
Yeah, so if you're interested in being a shepherd for this, please contact us. And
Yeah.
We'd like to talk to you.
Yeah, and we actually would like probably to ask one or two additional reviewers for this again, because some concern been raised, and we actually would like to have few more people to review it. So again, contact the chairs after the session or during the session via email if you'd like to review this document, because we'd like to advance it, but we also would like to get review before we proceed. Okay, working group documents. As I already said, we have two working group documents. Both of them will be discussed today. We have two documents which are working group ones, but we have not seen any updates for them. And we have one expired draft, which actually expired while being in the last call. But I think, Bob, would you like to say a few words on this?
So this is the Slack renumbering draft. There hasn't been an update for close to a year. I think it'll be a year in May. So the chairs have decided to assign this to a new author editor. And we also, because we'd like to see this move forward, but there's two other related drafts and a lot of discussion. So our goal is to probably combine this. So instead of doing 2 or 3 drafts in this topic, we do one. So that will be the person holding the pen for the working group will be trying to pull this all together. So that's what our plan is. We have notified the authors. I think we're about to get one in the queue, or we have one in the queue. But we think this needs to be done in order to make progress in this document. The authors have not made much progress recently. Fernando?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So first of all, hi to everyone. To a large part, that the lack of updates has been my fault. That has been bad. On the upside, we have been working with the co-authors these last couple of weeks on a revision that there was a cutoff, but we have ready to publish now. So if that would be possible, that's what we've been doing lately. The delay has been my fault, but we have picked that up.
Okay, well, thank you. It was nice to hear this because we have tried to get in touch with you before, but I think what's best for the working group is that we add another author editor to drive this forward. But you're certainly welcome to continue to participate and contribute to it, but someone else will be holding the pen.
Okay. Yeah, so as a last chair slide, just a reminder how we allocating slot for the agenda and in general for working group discussions. Obviously, there are a lot of other working groups which have problems, and the solution often require 6 men to do something, review documents, maybe allocate some code points and so on. 6 men is happy to look at those documents, but only after other working group confirms that it's a problem they'd like to solve, right? Which basically means adoption call or explicit confirmation from the chairs, right? Because we've seen a lot of agenda calls, requests for individual drafts, which have not been even presented often on the original working group. And so 6 men chairs do not think it's a good idea to allocate 6 men time before the original working group confirm it's a problem to be solved. Jared.
Jared Mach, Akamai. I'm wondering if the chairs have been paying attention to the DNS operational issues that have been raised, specifically as it would come to this cross-working group collaboration. So is there an intent for 6-man to pick up work around the handling of UDP-based IPv6 packets as a result of the information presented there?
I guess you're referring to fragmentation issue? Or what?
Any UDP-based messaging where the MTUs may not mismatch.
Am I hearing you are volunteering to write a draft?
I believe RFC 1035 has already been written, and IPv6 may be incompatible with that. And so my question is, are the chairs intending to liaise with the other working groups on this, or do you want a draft coming out of that working group to address this topic of the incompatibility between the transport and the protocol?
Yeah, no, we.
Lorenzo.
Sorry to clarify, Lorenzo Colletti. My question was, that's a great question, right? Like to me, it seems like we just have this bug. We've had this bug in the spec since 1998. Personally, I think fragmentation just doesn't work. We should put it out of its misery. But the question is not right. Why? The question was your question was are the chairs going to get involved? And I'm like, why would it be on the chairs to get involved? I mean, maybe this working group should pursue a solution.
I'm just going to point to the text there that says confirmation from the working group chairs.
As a working group chairs.
Yes, and so I'm wondering if this working group recognizes the problem statement at all, or if it's something where this working group does not.
Well, I think if the other working group chairs would contact us and ask the question, we'll follow up and respond or bring it to the working group list.
Jared, I think
happy to be involved.
This is basically a statement of when 6-man might or might not be involved in any random working group, other business.
And if I can also clarify what this means, we get drafts, individual drafts for work in other work groups, and we found it not very useful to give them agenda time here until we've heard from the working group that this is active work that working group is interested in. That's what this is talking about. I think the issue with DNS transport is slightly different, I think.
DNS transport or UDP
Well,
as a transport?
whatever
Because
you
gRPC or Google protobufs over UDP would also be an issue if you have a device that goes and emits them, because all of the egress interfaces are of that. So do you want a document saying that UDP is problematic in IPv6?
Sure.
Or
So yeah, I get
yes,
it.
yes.
So like if individuals or another working group see a problem which might be in scope for 6 men, we're happy to bring this to the working group, right? If you ask it, if chairs need to confirm if they see a problem with UDP, I would happily put your draft on agenda. Yeah. However, actually, I think it still might be like something V6 Ops needs to discuss and bring to 6 men, ideally, but we're happy to talk about this, right? So I don't think chairs need to explicitly list all possible like issues.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the order of operations. So this working group published a spec that breaks existing protocols and transports on the internet.
Draft and fix it.
Yeah, propose something.
It's not a question for the chair.
Yes,
It is, because I've heard some of the chairs oppose.
The chairs don't.
No, chairs
Don't get to decide stuff. They call consensus.
No,
Right?
the chair, like, let me give you an example. If there is a draft in DNSOP or any other working group which requires 6-man actions, right? We would happily consider it on the agenda if it's adopted by the working group or confirmed by the chairs. If it's a draft for 6 men, which should be in 6 men, then obviously, yeah, we'll consider it. So.
Tollis Eckert. Yeah, so I think we can talk about it also in my slot, right? So my individual slot here is to try to get progress on the things I very much feel is within the realm of 6 men to do about the extension header, for example, as opposed to do in the realm of the working group, right? So, and I don't think that needs to be totally serialized, right? Because by the point in time, a working group may have come to conclusion, and then it goes into 6 men and 6 men. Yeah, sorry, that doesn't work. Right, so I think to some degree we need to figure out what's that's one way, right? I'm not even at the point of doing an adoption call, but I think we need to take these things one at a time. And I think what Lorenzo said in general, right, the working group has a right to have a say in this.
I mean, I'll just say, it's not a formal procedure. It's just, we'd like to hear from the other working group, usually chairs, that this is something they think the working group is interested in.
Right, and my working group here, that was my motivation, said, oh, let's serialize everything, and I'm trying now. We need to start parallelizing it, otherwise we're making decision that 6 men is way too late than rejecting, for example, right? So we need to avoid that as well.
Yeah. So the reason why this exists, because sometimes work is coming to 6 men in form of agenda slot request, and we do not think that 6 men is necessary, has the expertise to understand if there's a problem worth solving and so on. So we want this to be done first in some other places.
Yeah, so Krishnan, so I think this slide is like a little bit more vague than the real intent of that thing. I think that might be what's tripping up Jared probably, is that this is for the extension space that we own, right? 6-man is it's for extension headers or options or everything. 6-man is not going to look at them until the other group has shown some interest in doing that thing, right? That's what really this is about, not really about problems in V6. I would certainly love to see the issues come up here for sure. I'll sit with you, I'll write the draft. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So no, I'll sit with you, Jared. Let's have a chat. And Jared said it's not it's about liaising with the other working groups, but I think it makes sense. If there's an issue to be fixed, I'll sit with you. We'll do it. Yeah.
What? No, I am sorry if we made this impression. It wasn't intention. Yeah, we'll follow up on this. I guess it's some misunderstanding which could be easily solved outside of this slot because we're running out of time.
I'm going to say responsible AD, point of privilege here, jump the queue. I haven't heard of any liaison. I haven't been copied on any liaison emails from other working groups to these chairs or about this stuff. If there's stuff that needs to be happening, then please include me and I'll do my best to help out. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this should conclude working group chair slide.
Yes.
So I'm going to unlock the queue and switch to next slides. Okay, control. Okay, you probably like this, so you'd like me to advance your slides?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jiedong from Huawei. I'm going to give an update about this draft called Carrying NRP Information in the IPv6 Extension Header on behalf of my co-authors.
No, I have.
You have to keep the mouse.
I keep the
Right.
mouse.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing. No? Okay, maybe. Exactly what I.
That's what she's doing. Try clicking the button.
Okay, go. Okay, I'll do
Thank you.
voice interface then.
Okay. So a little bit to recap about the background of this work. Natural resource partition is a terminology defined in TIS working group. It is used to refer to a collection of natural resources allocated on a set of links in the underlay network. And it was introduced in the RFC 9543 as an underlay network construct to support the network slice or enhanced VPN services. Previously, this draft will use VTN as the term to refer to the virtual underlay network. Well, according to the consensus in the TIS working group, it was agreed to converge to the term NRP so that we make this change in this version. And basically, this document introduced a new hop-by-hop option to carry the NRP-related information in the IPv6 packets. So this information can be used to by the transit nodes to determine the NRP packet belongs to, and the NRP packet processing and the forwarding can be performed. Before this meeting, there was some discussion on the main list about the one flag defining this option called S flag. And we had added some additional text, and also we had a discussion about the usage and benefit of this flag on the mailing list. So based on the discussion and the feedback, it seems we can continue to keep this as flag in this document. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So here are the updates since last presentation. As I mentioned, the terminology and description are aligned with the IETF network slice framework and the enhanced VPN framework documents. The term NRP is used consistently between all these documents. And so we need to rename the hop-by-hop option and the related ID in the option as NRP ID and NRP option, respectively. We also elaborate the usage of the S flag and its benefits. Basically, the S flag allows fine granular control of the packet forwarding behavior for packets in an NRP, especially when the NRP ID in the packet cannot match with the locally provisioned NRPs. We also have some editorial changes to improve the readability. Okay, next slide. Well, here we just want to show the discussion about the S flag on the mailing list. We got some feedback from Matt, and thanks Matt for the valuable discussion. From his opinion, in the beginning, the usage of the flag is not clear, whether it can be replaced by the local configurations. And the replies from authors is that the S flag can allow a flexible and a fine granular processing policy, either discard or use best effort forwarding for packets, a subset of packets in an NRP. Especially we can use it for some OEM packets or some specific service flows of an NRP. And this NRP is not provisioned on the transit node in this case. If we use the local configuration, it will be burdensome, and it has to be done on all the nodes along the forwarding path. And it will also require additional configuration models for NRPs because that kind of configuration is required for the NRPs which was not provisioned on the nodes. And similar comments from Ketan is received that he also think that maybe a global configuration knob can be used to control whether drop or do the fallback. And we have a reply to Ketan with this kind of information like a global norm may not be enough for this case because we need at least per NRP control or maybe even more fine granular control for a subset of packets in an NRP. And it is for NRPs which was not provisioned on the node. The configuration will be unusual in the current configurations. Okay, next slide, please. So the next step of this document, we believe we have addressed all the comments received, and the content has been stable, and we have aligned the terminology with other documents. So we think this document now is ready for working group last call. And we would also like to request the INR code point early allocation for this document, which we already did a request, send a request maybe in last year. Okay, that's all. And comments, Ketan?
Hi, Ketan Talaulikar, Cisco. So just as a context, this is a hop-by-hop header that needs to be acted upon in the forwarding plane, so in the hardware, along all routers along the path. Therefore, I think this option should be as simple and as efficient as possible for hardware processing. This was the background of my comment on the S flag. Now, if you look at the hop option, the way it is defined today, it has a reserved field. It has these flags with this S flag, which is really more to solve inconsistency between configuration, right? And it has a variable length NRP ID with some control context field. I think we really need to reevaluate and consider why not just make it a simple hop by hop header, which is a fixed size and carries only the NRP ID, nothing else.
You are proposing to remove all the other fields in the option?
Yes, make it as simple as possible. For it to be successful, make it as simple as possible and just have the NRP ID. And of course, I mean, we can discuss this in the TEAS working group, right? Where this is done, because there is similar NRP in MPLS label stack work, and it could be coordinated. But I just wanted to know the author's views on that. Yeah, I think I think that was also perhaps what Med, maybe you want to clarify your point.
Yeah, as I just mentioned about the S flag, we think that if we do not have this flag in the packet, it will require a lot of configurations, many nodes, and also this configuration mode is different from what we did with other maybe service. Like if you have a 10 NRPs enabled on the node, but there's another 100 NRP which is existing in the network, but you don't care on this node, then it will require you to have 100 NRPs configuration to specify the forwarding behavior when the packet is arrived with that NRP ID, which is not matched. So this kind of configuration mode is considered
let's look at this in context of
burdensome.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So I think we should look at it in the context of this framework, NRP framework work that is in TEAS. It is required to provision those resources. If a packet is coming without the resources being provisioned, let's say for a slice or for the NRP itself, then it's not going to get the treatment. I mean, the whole purpose of the NRP is defeated in my view. But again, this is not a topic for 6 months, so I don't want to take up time here, but we should discuss in TEAS, I feel.
Yeah, maybe we can have some discussion in TEAS about the needed functionality related to NRP. And here, I think we also consider the comments from the area director about make it a kind of generic for future, so that we leave some reserved fields. We also allow extensions for some other functionality. But for the NRP basic functionality, the length is fixed, and the format is, I think it's simple enough for implementation, right?
Just a very quick, this is not control plane, this is data plane. So let's be mindful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we'll take it on the list.
Yeah.
Because it looks like, there is some discussion about quite significant changes being proposed, as I can see, right? So let's take it on the list, right, for sake of time. Thank you. Okay, I guess, Lorenzo, you're on next. Let me get the slides. Stop slides, upload slides, prefix derogation.
Marks the spot. Okay, so you may have seen this before. If you think you have seen this before, it might be because you have. I'm here to talk about signaling prefix delegation availability to hosts with my co-authors. Next slide, please. Just as a recap, this is a companion document to the v6 ops docs, which describes the network side of things. As a recap, what we're trying to do is trying to make sure that we can use prefix delegation to, in general, nodes, but specifically here for hosts to provide addresses to hosts. What we are trying to do specifically with this document, the operational model has basically gotten through v6 ops. It's now sort of on its way to the ISG. But what we're trying to do specifically with this document is we're trying to provide a way to tell hosts whether it's a good idea to ask for a prefix or not. The reason is that some networks where you have scalability issues, you can look at the v6 ops document for more information. You have scalability issues, and a prefix is going to be much less of a load on the network to form multiple addresses than forming individual addresses. And this is true this is useful if the network has plenty of space. If the network is constrained, it's like a home network only has a /60 or /56. It's not possible to, there's not enough prefix to hand out a big prefix to every device. And so we want a way to signal to the device. If you don't think using a prefix is critical to you, then don't or do use PD. So next slide. And like I said, this is very similar to what we've been talking about for a while. This hasn't progressed very much because we were waiting for the v6 ops document to get through the working group and get on its way to the ISG. Next slide, I guess. As a recap, what are we doing? We're adding a new flag to the PIO. And it says, if you understand this flag, do not run autoconf on this PIO. Do not form addresses here. Instead, start a DHCP client if you haven't already started one and get a prefix. And you can assign addresses from that prefix. It's a delegated prefix. You can do whatever it is that you can do with the prefix that's delegated to you. You can form addresses out of it. You can announce it to your sort of like subtended hosts. You can assign it to VMs, whatever. And it needs to be in the PIO because it's specific. The bit to turn on PD is kind of per network, but the thing that says turn off Slack for this PIO is specific to that PIO. So you might want to still use Slack, for example, for ULA addresses, but use PD to obtain a global prefix, for example. Okay. And for multi-homing, of course, you might have different upstreams with different opinions. Next slide. There have been sort of some amount of discussions, some amount of feedback that the host behavior is underspecified. In particular, that feedback has gone to the v6 ops draft, where it's kind of out of scope. Like the v6 ops draft is really about the networking. This is the place to discuss host behavior. And I just put a refresher here. None of this is new in the draft. This draft has been quite stable for a while. But just as a refresher, basically the host needs to track how many prefixes are currently, preferred on link, and that have the p bit set. And if there's at least one, it should keep a client running and basically use PD just as a sort of normal prefix delegation. In general, just like 8415 says, DHIPv6, if the client detects a change in configuration information, it must issue rebind because it's prefix delegation, not addressing. If it were addressing, it would have to use confirm. But for example, if a prefix is deprecated, the host should issue a rebind. This can be helpful, for example, if the host is roaming to a different subnet. And it also clarifies, the slide also clarifies, again, this text was already in the draft, but just here as a refresher, if you assign addresses from the prefix, you can use as many addresses as you want. And you must do source address selection as though the addresses were assigned to the interface where you got the prefix. So for example, if you were to assign this prefix on a downstream interface because you wanted to act as a router, for example, for tethering, If you want to originate traffic from that prefix, you need to do, for the purpose of source address selection, you need to treat those addresses as if they were in the upstream interface. And also, if you assign the prefix on the downstream interface, if you have other hosts there, you must defend those addresses from DAD. You must respond to neighbor discovery for those addresses and so on. And also we added text to make sure, text to make sure that in a multi-homing situation, you can still get multiple prefixes by PD and still assign them to the right next stop for a Rule 5.5. And this actually is a new addition that we put in. Don't forward packets that come from the interface where you got the prefix to the interface. It'll create a loop. Don't do it. But that's pretty obvious. One question I have for the group is there anything else that we need to say here about host behavior? One thing that we could do is we could cite 7278, with the one where essentially IPv6 tethering RFC, which has some detailed description of how you have these addresses on the upper and the source, northbound and southbound interfaces and so on. We could cite that. But, I personally don't think so. I think this is clear enough, but, wanted to hear from the group if there's any feedback there. Next slide. Yeah, so updates. I guess I should have had this slide earlier. Again, the PD document for V6 ops is on its way to the ISG, and it describes the network model. We are trying to make this a workable address assignment model that marries the benefits of DHCP with the benefits of being able to form as many addresses as we want using Slack. And we think this is actually a meaningful step forward in IPv6's capabilities, and definitely much better than what we could ever achieve in IPv4. So, and the draft, this draft was adopted shortly after IETF 118. There have been no comments, only very minor changes to the text. Next slide. So, yeah, so we think this is ready for last call because again, it's been pretty stable. And we have an implementation on Android that's in progress. We do have a PD implementation. One of the issues with turning on that PD implementation is that we could potentially break existing networks because we don't have a clear signal about when we can turn this on. Right now, what we have in Android is code that if it gets an RA and it can't find an address, it assumes that the network doesn't want to do Slack and it starts PD. This is a heuristic. We don't know how well it'll work in the real world. And the bar is kind of really high. And so we are waiting to, in order to really do PD on Android, we kind of need this, I think, to make sure that we can do it safely. And so we wanted to submit a request for an early allocation so that we can sort of start, we can actually check in the code that does this. And yeah, that's it, I guess.
Suresh?
Yeah, thanks, Lorenzo. So I'm still not convinced that the PO bit is the right way to do it. I did go through the reasoning in the draft. So there's a couple of issues I have with that. There's no relationship between the prefix you're going to get using PD and what's in the PIO, right? So and the other part that worries me is that there could be multiple PIOs, right? You need to talk about inconsistency between them. So I personally think there should be an RA flag instead of a PIO flag. But I'm sure you have something.
There is text. There is text. Yeah.
No, if you have that, I would really like to see that and evaluate based on that, saying why you didn't pick RA flag, because for me the RA flag meets everything, and this P is not linked to the prefix. Maybe Jen has something. She looks very eager to answer.
I'm just jumping into this discussion because I just realized that you might want to wait for my presentation about my individual draft, which theoretically might make it possible to be in array because arrays will be specific for prefix. Yeah. Because currently, if you have multi-homing scenario, you'll set one array, right? And you might want to do it per prefix still. So yeah, actually we have a text in the draft about why it is in PIO actually. Yeah, so please take a look if it answers your question.
I did look at it. Okay. I just want to make sure that if that's the way you want to go, kind of talk about what happens if there's multiple PIOs or different things.
Yeah. Okay. So adding text to explain what happens. One thing to point out, given the discussion in Slack, I think earlier this week, RA flags are very ill-defined. right? You basically
can
end
start
up
with a good one. So you can actually define this, because I like the definition of this, which says like not having this set to 0 does not signal anything. I would have loved that in M1.
the fact that you can't cancel a flag in the array because it's always there, that's sort of painful. You can deprecate the PIO, but you can't remove the flag. Anyway, so I guess the concrete thing is like we'll try to write some more text there to explain what should happen when there's conflicts. That's true, right? If for example, two were to send you the same PIO and the flags disagree, what should you do? That's not there.
No,
right?
or if you have two PIOs in the same array from the same router and they disagree.
You do what they say. They can't disagree. They can't disagree.
Just real quick, you said the client should be able to request an unlimited number of prefixes?
No. Form an unlimited number of addresses out of the prefix. It's not unlimited. It's only it's limited to 2 to 64. It is limited, I guess.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, but the client device is only going to get one. Like, I'm trying to think of how much state I need to maintain in my upstream device.
One.
No. But for each sub device off of it.
None. You put one forwarding entry pointing at the device, and you have 1/64 reading entry. You need a neighbor cache entry for the link local, which is your next hop, and then you need one forwarding entry, period. Because everything else is at 64, and this also like does help a lot with reduced state.
You're talking to another router.
Yeah. Okay. I suggest we take it offline for sake of time. So Tim is in the queue. I just talking about this discussion.
Yeah. Tim Winters, QA Cafe. So this is your friendly DHC working group chair. The only thing I would say here is you might want to say something about people asking for PD and IANA at the same time. You have a lot of text about Slack. You have no text about IANA. Someone will do this and they will have regrets. So,
I will come and tap your wisdom
just
post-haste after this session.
Yeah, just basically tell people don't ask for the IANA if the P-bit's set. You don't want to do that.
Okay.
This will end in tears.
I think you're probably going to want to do what the network operator wants you to do. Let's talk about
We'll chat.
There's probably subtleties, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so we'll take the rest of the discussion on the list. Actually, on the list is even better than offline, but yeah. Okay, now we're moving to individual drafts. Ron was supposed to be our next presenter, but we do not see him online. So we'll move to, so we'll skip to the next presentation. I need to click. Okay. Hi, Brian. Do you like to control the slides, or you want me to move them for you?
It's easier if you do it, I think. How's my sound? Can you hear me?
It's good.
Loud and clear.
Okay. So the title slide you've had time to read, so go to the next one. Summary of this talk is firstly what happened to RFC 6874 bis, and secondly, what is the new proposal? I'd rather keep all discussion for the end because all these topics chase each other's tails. So perhaps we could just hold off on the queue until the end. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, 6874 bis was supposed to make browsers accept URLs like the ones on the screen with complete linked local addresses, including the interface ID. We sent that to the ISG 1 year ago, and we have made no concrete progress since then in resolving the discussers. And we've had new versions, and we've had side meetings, and we've had a heck of a lot of email, not all of it on list, I'm afraid, but we just have basically got nowhere. And the reasons we got nowhere are actually going to be covered in HTTPS tomorrow rather than here today, I think. Next slide, please. So the issues were, firstly, from Rob Wilton, the former Ops AD, basically concern about devices whose interface names don't conform to what would fit in a URL. It's really an issue about the scope of the draft. It's a bit complicated, but I believe it's basically soluble. But we didn't really try to solve it because of the other discuss, put there by Murray and seconded by Francesco. So 2 ADs really supporting that. Discuss, caused by concerns from the W3C and the browser community. Firstly, about parsing the percent sign, but that's relatively minor. And secondly, this whole issue called cross-origin security, when you have a locally significant URI that only applies in the machine where it's created and on the interface that it refers to, and doesn't apply as such in any other machine or on any other interface. And we've had a year's discussion. We've updated the draft 6 times, and we have basically no prospect of a compromise solution. And that's why the draft that's going to be presented in HTTP BIS is also relevant. Next, please. So our conclusion, the other half of our is Bob Hindon, who for this purpose is an author, not a chair. When you're in a hole, stop digging. And we think it's time to try a different approach to this problem. And the way to do that is to focus on the user interface, not on the wire format, because URIs and URLs go on the wire. And maybe this is a user interface problem. Next, please. So there is a new draft, individual draft, which has been discussed quite a bit with some positive reactions. And it's called entering zone identifiers in user interfaces. In practice, it means entering link local addresses in user interfaces. It's very supposedly very strictly scoped to nodes that do indeed support RFC 4007, which means either a name F0, which is on most operating systems, or just the number, which is the way Windows does it, but definitely the full format as defined in RFC 4007. Next, please. The use cases are very much what we had in the previous draft. I'd like to underline that they become critical in the IPv6 only era, because if you can't type in an address that you need to type in, you can't go back to the IPv4 alternative. Simplest use case is the existence check. Does this address exist? We normally do that with ping. So ping actually already satisfies our requirements. You might need to configure a device, home router, where it's very typically today that you're supposed to type in an RFC 1918 address, which is on the packaging of the router, and it just works. If there's no IPv4, that doesn't work. Monitoring tools, Wireshark, for example, allows you to specify the interface for capture, but it doesn't, as far as I know, allow you to use the full RFC 4007 address format when you want to say filter on a particular address. There's a case in Microsoft's printing support where the user is actually exposed to a link local URL with a % sign in it, and they can't use it. And there is the National Marine Electronics Association's mechanism for IP networking on your boat, if you're rich enough to have a boat, and they need to be able to use IPv6 linked local addresses explicitly. So those are the use cases. Next, please. Formal scope of the draft, I'll just repeat, it's very specifically devices whose network stack supports RFC 4007. Anything else is out of scope. Next, please. The normative content is very simple. It says a user interface that supports entry of an IPv6 address should provide a means for entering a link local address qualified with a zone identifier. There's at least 3 ways of doing that suggested. Just typing in the full address with the % sign and the interface name. If that's not practical, use a different delimiter, like a hyphen. And if that is also impractical for some reason, two separate input fields, put the address in one box and the interface name in another box. All we're saying is if you allow the user to input an address, they must be able to put in a linked local address. Otherwise, it's an incomplete solution. Next, please. The browser issue remains. Okay, you haven't read draft Skenazi HTTP bis link local URI BCP. You need to go and read it now. Because the zone identifier is not considered in part of a URL in the model we're proposing, and that does not resolve the difficulties that browsers have, because they really need to consider the zone identifier or the interface or something like that as part of the origin model. So we don't claim that this requirement solves the browser problem, and that's an HTTP bis issue as of now. Next, please. Just a note for programmers, when you input a complete interlinked local address, you need to store the address and the zone identifier separately or together. That's a programming choice. The zone identifier will be converted to an interface index via the socket API. There's a function for that. A faulty identifier will be detected during that conversion and obviously should be reported to the user. And every socket call that you make using the address has to supply both the address and the interface index. It's a two-component thing. It's not a one-component thing. And a lot of programming, I suspect, where people have done a quick update to support IPv6 doesn't do that right. I've got evidence, for example, that on Linux, ping does it right, but ping6 does it wrong in certain cases. Okay, next, please. Housekeeping issues. The draft obsoletes RFC 6874. It's never been implemented. There is a choice because draft Skenazi also obsoletes RFC 6874. I personally think that's a six-man job, not an HTTP bis job. And the draft effectively extends RFC 4007. And so the question was raised whether we should state formally that we do update 4007. That's all I've got to say. I don't think it's very fruitful to discuss in detail here why the browser community cannot or claims they cannot implement either RFC 6874 or BIS because we don't have the expertise in this room. But that's only my opinion. Next slide, please. And that's the cue for the chairs.
What?
Go ahead.
Tolles Eckert, yeah, so this is all over the place. First of all, I wonder why nobody brought up the argument that we need
Sorry. Go ahead.
6847 with or without BIS, purely, for any type of API, like, in Java, JavaScript, RESTconf, that basically uses your URLs, and that is low level and doesn't want to depend on DNS, right? So, I mean, that's to me just one of the core arguments for that stuff. Other than that, I don't think anybody should be using IPv6 addresses in any user interface unless he is a poor network operator and need to debug the network when DNS isn't working, right? So, which is why maybe all of the UI stuff you're talking about is better in v6 ops than in v6 men, because I would hope they're a lot more interested in making life easier for network operators that do this stuff. As far as our work is concerned, so 6847 and BIS, I mean, the core thing that I think folks from the application side got totally frustrated with is that what we call zones are not zone identifiers. They're local interface identifiers. And for the same zone, every device in that zone uses a different identifier. So if we want to clean up stuff, we should clean up our terminology first, right? Whether that's worth another draft, I don't know. When it comes to Dave's great draft, right, I would say that, yeah, we should do everything for MDNS to work better. Multi-homing, a couple of things to do. Hopefully we'll get people around. I just don't want it to retire 6847. I think that is a, thing for APIs, as I said, in programming for network operators. And the argument that that shouldn't be implemented because probably 2 router cores in the world don't want to have the complexity to implement it, that's fine, right? I don't think we need to build a standard RFC for the IPv6 address architecture and how to express it based on what browsers can implement. Not everything we're standardizing here does have to be implemented by browsers, right? So, sorry, thousands of things.
Lorenzo Colletti, a few points, I think. Oh, I lost my notes. Well done. Okay, so I think a lot of tools already will do this because they all bottom out at getaddreinfo or INET P2N, sorry, getaddreinfo, and that does work. It'll do this for you, right? So if you pass the string, if you know well enough at least to pass the string down to getaddreinfo, it will work. And that's why even Java actually supports scoped addresses. We know because we got link local addresses wrong 3 times in Android. It's like, hopefully now they're here to stay. But so I think a lot of this stuff will just automatically work. I think the API point is a good one. We do need to make sure that the programming language APIs do support this because link local addresses are scoped and they don't work otherwise. So I think that's one point. It's not 2 components generally because pretty much everything. Well, I mean, at least when you bottom out to the C library APIs, you do have stock Adder 6, and that does have a scope ID. It belongs in there. Even Java, in their sort of like not generally good sort of grasp of networking, they did put the scope ID into INET 6 address. So I think probably most languages got that right. Another thing around browsers, one thing to point out is that, I think Chrome and Firefox couldn't use another interface even if they wanted to. Like, I know for sure Chrome is not capable of using a different interface. It is like a single network code, and it's like very, very tightly coupled to that. Believe me. Yes. So one thing I wanted to say, I did say on the list, is I think we should say that for applications that don't understand this, they should at least accept a link local address. And if the OS has some concept of default interface, they should just use it if they know no better, because that will get you your URL in your browser, right? You can say, if you type FE80::1, Chrome doesn't know how to do interfaces anyway, but if you type FE80::1 and it's running on Windows, which has a default network, it'll just work. So I think that is something that we should say here. And it is not something I feel that like the browser community could have any particular opinion on, because at the end of the day, it's an IP address. We just define the rules of communication, and we are authoritative for those rules. So I think that's a better way to get the browser to work if you want to. And I think that's what I had to say.
Yeah, this is Brian. Just to comment, thank you for that input about Chrome. That matches exactly what I've observed while hacking around at the MDNS solution of it. I can make it work for Firefox, but not for Chrome.
Well, why don't we have 2 more people in the queue and then Eric. So Dave Thaler.
Hey, Brian, thanks for the presentation. So a couple things that I liked about the draft, and then one question. So I liked the fact that the draft is not specific to HTTP, right? In a sense, it's written that HTTP is out of scope. This is talking of just about addresses in general, whether it's about use in URIs or any other type of identifier, right? And so I think that it was a good approach. I like the the title and the abstract are nicely worded, in the sense of my question is not about those, because I think those are fine. My question is about the normative content that you mentioned, which constrains it to link local addresses, and that operates under the assumption that you're scoping it to unicast. I claim that another use case is if you ever have to type in something, there's a case we have to type in a multicast address. When you type in a multicast address, link local is not the only scope. Okay, and so I would ask if it's possible, or if you think it's a reasonable use case, that section 3 abstract it to be scoped address rather than link local address. That's my question.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good point. only reason I'm a bit hesitant about the scope terminology is that, as you know, we scrapped the other interesting scope, which was site local. So
that's
scope
only
and
for
interface.
unicast.
Yeah,
Only for
scope and
unicast. For multicast,
Yep.
you still have a bunch of scopes. So that's my question. That's why I'm saying
Yep.
it's really a multicast question. If
Yep.
you treat multicast as being in scope of the draft, then you should, because I think your recommendations apply equally to multicast. There's nothing magic about unicast and the recommendations that you talked about so far, because it's all about the user interface layer. So I think if you want to treat multicast as another one of the use cases, because you listed a bunch of interesting use cases, if you add multicast address there, then I think it's just some wording tweaks, and I think all the rest of your recommendations still apply. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. That's very good.
Okay, David.
Hi, Brian. David Skenazy, both IPv6 enthusiast and browser enthusiast today. So first, I want to really thank Brian not only for the draft and the presentation, but for the back and forth on the list on this topic. I think it was quite informative. And I want to agree with the Brian's characterization of events. Everything seemed perfectly correct to me. The point where I start to disagree is on like future recommendations, in particular the normative text in this draft. So from my perspective, initially the goal was let's make link local work everywhere. And I think from these conversations we've realized that browsers are kind of quite different from something like ping. And if you're curious to understand why, please come to my presentation tomorrow morning in HTTP BIS. But anyway, let's just assume for today's conversation that they're separate. In the case of browsers, the solution isn't that simple. And so Brian's draft says that and declares them out of scope, which I think is good. And then I have a draft for potentially doing that. But then the rest of the goal here is non-browsers, but I'm kind of confused about what we're then trying to accomplish, because I think when it comes to ping, SSH, telnet, I think we can already declare mission accomplished. They all work with link local addresses and scope identifiers, at least on all the platforms that I personally use. So I wonder what the point of this document is to say, hey, your user interface should do this. The ones that matter to me that aren't browsers already all do. So I'm not sure we need to print this guidance personally.
The other thing, however, I would say is I'm fairly convinced of what I said, that there are quite a lot of places where people haven't implemented this right, even if it appears to be right on the outside. For just an example, when I persuade my Linux box that test.local is a valid MDNS name and that it resolves to a specific link local address, ping on Linux finds it and it works. Ping 6 on Linux doesn't. It goes wrong, right? Because it doesn't handle what it gets back from MDNS correctly. It doesn't convey the interface number across to the socket. So there is still work to be done, and maybe we should repurpose the document slightly to also tackle that issue, that there is still work to be done in the world to get everybody supporting this stuff right. And these are things that will come out in IPv6 only environments that we won't see in the fallback to IPv4 scenario.
Thanks. And just for the record, if we kind of tweak this to these specific use cases that are broken today, then I would be supportive, because that makes sense. Like ping 6 should work, and I have no objection to us saying ping 6 should work. Thanks, Brian.
Good. Eric?
I just wanted to say thank you for this document, Brian, and also thank you for all the work you put in to try to address every bit of feedback you received on the previous document. I think there's been some discussion on the list of late that probably obviates having to have any kind of discussion here about the relationship to URLs and other SDOs and so on and so forth. But also to thank, an innumerable number of people who gave me input on the background of relationships and where things are defined and whose territory is marked out where. So anyway, thank you for that. And I think I'll probably I'll mark the 6874 BIS as dead, and we can work forward from here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ted, you are next. Let's see if you have your up-to-date slides. Wait, hold on. Let me see. It was meeting material. Let me refresh the document. Okay, now share slides. Okay.
That's not the most recent one.
Sorry.
Oh well, no worries.
But I did refresh.
We
yeah,
did
no,
what
I,
we
it's,
could.
I suspect it's just a tooling issue. There's no need to fret.
Yeah.
The main content is roughly the same. So I'm here to talk to you about the stub router or the snack router RA flag. I think there's at least some consensus that we can call it the snack router, and that distinguishes it from other meanings of stub router. Next slide. By the way, my name is Ted Lemon. Yeah, wow, this is yesterday's slide. So Stuart did a nice explanation of what a stub router is, which is different than what's on this slide. So I'm going to do Stuart's explanation as best I can, and what's on this slide is also true. Basically, the idea of a snack router is to make it possible to connect devices to an infrastructure network through a router that itself connects automatically to an infrastructure network. So in other words, essentially to give the same experience for a device that's connected to the stub network as would be the case for a device that's connected directly to the network. And I mean, the most obvious use case of this is you have some kind of 802.15.4 network for controlling, lights or thermostats or whatever in your house, and you'd like to be able to discover and communicate with devices on that network. And you're a homeowner and you're not an expert on networking, and so you're not going to go in and modify the configuration user interface of your router to make this work. It has to happen automatically. So stub routers basically have to do a lot of reasoning, or maybe reasoning is the wrong word, but they have a bunch of heuristics that they follow about what they see on the infrastructure network, and based on those heuristics, they engage in various behaviors. So this document is about a thing that we need to do in order to enable those heuristics to work properly. Next slide. So stub router RA flag is basically a flag that stub routers put in the router advertisement that basically just say, hi, this RA came from a stub router. This flag is not intended to be consumed by anything other than stub routers. So if you are implementing something that is not a stub router, you're not supposed to set the flag and you're supposed to ignore it. This is not a general purpose flag for all stub routers. It's specific to snack routers. So there are other things that people call stub routers that are not snack routers, and those things do not use the stub router flag. Hosts do not use the stub router flag. Hosts do not change their behavior based on the stub router flag. The purpose of the stub router flag is to accomplish two specific things. One is that a stub router might connect to infrastructure that has no IPv6 service, and then IPv6 service shows up. Or a stub router could be connected to a network that another stub router is connected to and start advertising a prefix because of communications issues. And we want to be able to tell the difference between those two situations. So the stub router flag allows us to tell the difference between those two situations. The other thing is that we've been talking about the MNO bits. I think we're actually, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so an infrastructure, sorry, I'll go a little bit more into the infrastructure prefix thing. An infrastructure prefix is something that we want. If we're a stub router and we're making IPv6 addressing available on the network, which we have to do in order for there to be routing between the stub network and the infrastructure network, we don't want to be disturbing the infrastructure network. We don't want to be like doing extra stuff on the infrastructure network that's unnecessary. And so if the infrastructure network is an IPv6 network, then we would like to just consume the IPv6 that's already on the network and not produce our own IPv6 network for the network, IPv6 addressing for the network. So we'll advertise an RA on that network, and that RA will include a route to the stub network. But If there's IPv6 on the infrastructure network, it will not include a PIO to be used on the infrastructure network. However, if there is no IPv6 on the infrastructure network, then it will include a PIO. And so the whole point of this, the bit for this particular use case is just to avoid the situation where we have two different stub routers fighting over who's going to publish the prefix. Each stub router can see that the other prefix is from another stub router, and we have an algorithm for which stub router bows out. So we don't have to worry about there being this ongoing deprecation cycle. Next slide. And then MNO bit consistency. This is something that's a little bit of a pain. And so we have been talking in the stub router, the snack document, snack simple, about maintaining the MNO bits, because currently the neighbor discovery document says that the MNO bits have to be the same in all router advertisements on the network, that it is a misconfiguration for them to vary. And that means that stub routers have to advertise whatever the correct value is from the infrastructure. And so if that's the case, then being able to tell whether the MNO bits came from a stub router or whether they came from an infrastructure router is important. So that said, we've been having some conversations, and I sent some mail to the list. And I think the consensus among those of us who were having that conversation, and I'd actually really love to hear from other people here if they disagree with this consensus, the consensus has been that actually that requirement in the neighbor discovery document is obsolete. The MNO flags don't have a defined meaning. And as a consequence, DHCP implementations do not take action when the MNO bits change. Some DHCP implementations will not try to do DHCP until they see the MNO bit set. But there aren't any DHCP implementations that will stop doing DHCP if the MNO bit goes from set to not set. Tim? I'm quoting Tim here, so if I got it wrong, it would be good for you to correct me.
No, that's what we experienced. So back in the 24, I feel like I'm dating myself here. Back in 2462 days, we had a lot of implementations when the flags would flop, they would kill their DHCP client or turn it off and on and do all kinds of really weird things. So that text got removed from 4862 Slack. I haven't seen that in over a decade. I haven't seen anybody doing any of that. Traditionally, their RAs are always funny. There are multiples on a network, and clients have to deal with that. If they see the flag turned on, they'll try DHCP. I've not seen anybody do anything with the negative case in a very long time. So 0 just means do what you want. There are implementations in the world who don't care what the MNO flags. They send DHCP no matter what. They love their DHCP and they're going to ask for it. So I think you'd be okay not worrying about this problem as the snack working group. If you want my advice, I would just continue onward and not worry about trying to sync them all up. There are lots of RA bits that we don't sync up and we make the clients deal with it. Retrans time, reachable time, all that stuff. I don't think this is that weird.
All right.
I'm going to have to go ahead and disagree with you on that one.
Who are you, by the way?
Why do you hate us, Lorenzo?
I mean, so look, I'm sorry. This is the letter of 4861 is very clear on what to do here.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. All right.
It's clear on what to do with the bits.
No. Okay. So, just to make clear what I'm saying here. If we're saying like this is a license to do whatever we want, we do not have that license until we change 4861, right? Like announcing
conflict. We're not proposing to make this change here. This is just I'm just talking about why this maybe
saying that if we just do best effort and like try to sync the bits as a best effort, that's okay, right? I'm just saying like doing whatever we want is not in scope unless we change 4861. To say that, because 4861 is very clear that you need to take the latest version. And there's code that Yoshifuji wrote in 2000 whatever that does this in Linux. And the problem is that implementations, by the way, are going to look at the interface flag. Okay, they're going to do RTM. They're going to do RTM get link. Ask me how I know, right? They're going to do RTM get link, and they're going to say the interface flag persisted by the kernel. The value is X. Now, if we change stuff whenever we want, like because we think things don't care, any implementation that's going to do a spot check and the value of the flag is going to behave non-deterministically, and you don't want that, right, Tim? You don't.
I don't like it.
Non-deterministic is bad, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No. I mean, just to clarify what I said, Lorenzo is correct. 4861 neighbor discovery defines these. The Slack version of this was where it talked about addressing. That text disappeared and said, if you read the appendix, says, hey, we got rid of this because it confused people, but we didn't deprecate the behavior, which is where it confused people. We really tried. It didn't work out. I think we can write this draft. Ulay is somewhere laughing because me and him will have his constant joke about the M&O bits every 3 or 4 IETFs this comes up. I can't imagine we'll be able to agree on this, but I'm happy to be involved in trying to solve this problem again.
Good. Copy the bits, will be fine.
Yeah,
That's easier said than done.
So Ted, like I'll say the same thing as yesterday, which is like do the best effort. Don't not beat yourself over this because you're not going to be able to solve it fully, and just do your best, whatever, right? Like because as like exactly like Tim said, I've seen all behaviors. People who start but don't stop on a edge trigger to a 0. People who don't care about it, like all those things exist. So like just try to do it as much as you can.
So the one thing that Tim said that I'd be curious if Lorenzo disagrees with is if a DHCP server starts based on what it saw on the interface flags, it's not going to stop when the interface flags change.
Usually, yes. That's the client, right? You mean the
client? Yeah.
So yeah, usually it doesn't. Like
well, usually or always.
I've never seen it. Yeah.
Digging as I proceed to dig the grave of the address notification draft, which has cleared Tim's review and is now going to be subject to extreme retaliation as Shepherd. So like what we did for the address notification draft is we said, you mustn't send this when M&O are 0. We didn't say when you would check that M&O are 0. Now I don't know. So Tim is going to tell us that's a bad idea.
I'm feeling like what I would like to have happen is that we update RFC 4861 to wire or the bits. So if you get 5 RAs in a row and any one of those has the bits set,
someone's going to tell you that there's no way to change it from 1 to 0. And your value depends on when you join the network. You can't win.
Why do we care?
Well, no, I'm just saying, okay, so we can deprecate them. But the reason we put, for FYI, the reason we put the M&O bits into the address notification draft is so that because people didn't want to see a lot of multicast.
Sure. Yeah, which I get. Yeah, and that's fair. But if you turn on the M&O bits at some point, then I think it's fair to say that at least for the lifetime of that RA, that is to say, there's a router, there's a lifetime. Well, the lifetime of something in that RA, I don't know. We can talk about it, but.
Huh? The bits don't have a lifetime. That's the problem.
Well, the RA has the router. There is a router lifetime.
Applies to the router default router. Does not apply to the flags. The flags have like no way to clear them and no lifetime. They're a disaster. This is why
I know they're horrible. But
anyway, so to answer your question, an implementation might well look at the current value of the flag because the kernel does persist it. And so the value that's going to read depends on when it runs the code.
Right.
Okay, just for sake of time, I know the discussion about M&O flags might take us like till next IETF and probably longer. So Darren, comment on this, right? And then let's proceed. You have more slides.
Let's go to the next one.
Okay, yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, Jen. Darren, that the snack router RA flag has nothing to do with this conversation. Right. So we will have more conversation about that.
Yep.
Okay, next.
Next slide. Status of the document. We reviewed this in Snack. We reviewed it, that is to say, we reviewed it on the mailing list. We had a big discussion about it in the Snack meeting on Tuesday. Things have changed since I wrote this slide. What we decided in the Snack meeting on Tuesday, there was a big controversy about whether we should just move this into the Snack simple document. The outcome of the controversy was we decided we really did want to have a separate document, but we didn't want to have any normative text in the document with respect to how the flag is used. So the document, we updated the document yesterday, and the current version of the document describes, basically it says, we want a bit, and if you're not implementing Snack simple, you should ignore the bit, and you shouldn't set the bit. And that's all it says.
Should or must ignore.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for clarification. Yeah. Basically, you're forbidden to do anything with the bit unless you're implementing Snack simple, and which is what we want. This is not a general purpose bit. So the reason we're bringing it to to 6-man is because 6-man has change control over the bits in principle. So this is the place to have that. But we obviously do not want 6-man to have to fully understand the SNAC document. If you want to understand the SNAC document, you should be showing up for the SNAC meetings.
But we do encourage people here to participate and understand what's going on in SNAC.
Absolutely, yeah. No, please.
Okay, next.
Next slide. I think the next slide just says what I just said. So, and yeah, one additional thing is that there was a question as to whether we should use the RA flags option or just use one of the remaining flags in the RA header. There are current implementations of this that use the RA flags option. So we are fairly agnostic about this. I mean, personally, I feel like the flags should just be allocated in order, but that's just Ted being, annoying. So, the working group is perfectly free to choose otherwise. And the document doesn't currently say which. It just says, give us a bit.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that it?
Lawrence, the queue was locked. If you, okay, you got okay. So I guess we'll take it to the list. Well, please read the draft. My understanding is it's very short draft, so everyone could have an opinion. Very easy. Don't need to read the whole SNAC document. So we'll continue with this on the list.
Yeah. And I suspect the only issue will be whether it's the next bit or the one after that. So it's a great bike shedding discussion.
And what am I next?
Yes.
I'm next. Okay, so let me get.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Okay.
We're right on time.
Right on time. So okay. So let's see if I can make it work. Can I make it work now? No. No. So
I can do this.
Okay. Hello. So yes, this is draft which might sound, content of it might sound familiar to you. So next slide, please, actually. So problem statement, renumbering again, yes? Apparently, if you look at 4861, when router becomes an advertising interface, arrays are normally sent with first 16 seconds. But if something changes, those changes may be sent out, again, within next 16 seconds. As someone who wrote a postmortem as a result of this router behavior, I would like to change it. And I know that Slack renum draft does suggest changing this. But initially, I basically came across it when I was working on my v6 ops draft about like unique link local addresses. So next slide, please. Proposed change to the 48621, which actually changed since 00. So if you look in 00, the text is not what you see on the slides, but it will be updated in 01. That suggestion is if anything changes, the router must immediately send unsolicited array. And everything else as before, right? You might start retransmitting arrays and so on, but changes should be propagated, actually must be propagated as soon as possible. Because honestly, I do not think it's sensible just to hold on until the next scheduled array, which might be in the next like 10 or 20 minutes, whatever, right? So next slide, please. So yeah, previous work in this area. It's been discussed on the list. We have very similar requirements for CPEs already, but first of all, it's only to CPEs, right? I think ideally it should apply to every router which is sending arrays, because like when you say CPE, you're normally talking about, I don't know, small home routers, like small, medium businesses, but this also applies to like huge enterprise boxes, right? This also should happen there, or data centers. Also, for some reason, those CPEs RFCs talking about address PIO information mostly, right? However, in some cases, you might want to change other type of information. Default router lifetime, I might want to drain router immediately. take it out of the service and switch to another one, or I might want to change other type of information. And again, waiting for like minutes for this is not acceptable. So Slack renum suggested text very, very similar to what this draft proposed, but this draft was like one pager, right? Much shorter than Slack renum, does not include all those changes. And I was hoping to move this one much, much faster because Slack renum has many changes. And it was expired, but now, as Bob said, there is this, like, we'd like to advance Slack renum, so maybe we can integrate that change into Slack renum. Next slide, please. However, there is a second change, which is not in Slack renum, again, not in 0.0, because this change came like in the beginning of the IETF week, and I was trying not to submit new versions of the draft during IETF week because people do not like that. So I don't know how many of you were in the V6 ops when I was talking about how good would it be if router link local address, which is used for sending arrays from, could be specific for a prefix, right? So when your prefix change, your link local change, so new logical router appears from the host perspective. So, and when we were discussing the draft, comments were made that yes, in some cases, you might have multiple PIOs configured. For example, it could be ULAs and global prefix, right? And if you only change your global prefix, you do not want to disrupt your ULA flows at all, right? Because your ULA router should stay same. So what would be very useful is to make a virtual, like logical router, logical router, which means arrays should be sent per PIO. So if you have multiple PIOs, the router actually should send multiple arrays with link local address, which is specific for that PIO. Next slide, please. So yeah, so basically what I'm proposing, right? Let's say you have two prefixes. It could be ULA or global, or it could be actually two globals if it's multi-homing. And host would receive two PIOs, two arrays from two logical routers, two next hops, and then it would behave as well as it could behave in multi-homing environment, basically. Next slide, please. So previous work in this area, 2016, Berlin IETF, when we were talking about enterprise multi-homing, this was exactly what I put on the slide in the context of source destination routing and how you can have multiple prefixes in, well, I think the word PVD was just invented at that time, but basically it doesn't really matter, right? Those arrays could come, it could be an array per PVD, link local per PVD, or it could be link local per like logical configuration or prefix and so on. The idea is, again, ensure that for each prefix you have a different next hop. This is actually in line with what 8028, the Brian's draft RFC about like multi-homing and host saying. So yeah, 8028. So if we would like host to prefer default gateway per prefix, right, it's exactly what we need to do. And here is actually when we're in conflict with Slack renum, which is actually saying, please put everything in a single array and send it in a single array. So next slide, please. So yeah, next step. So yeah, it's a slightly outdated slide. Yeah, well, actually not. So yeah, I see few options, right? I don't know what the group think. We can continue with this. We can move 4861 update into Slack renum and continue to Slack renum, or we can put everything in Slack renum and have fewer drafts in the working group. So I'd like to hear opinions on the proposed changes in general and on how to proceed with like from document perspective.
Tim.
Okay, it does say the queue's closed, not that it stopped me.
Oh, we need to unlock.
I'm
multitasking here.
Tim Winner's QA Cafe. So two things. One, you're definitely going to want to rate limit the RA changes. If somebody is configuring a router, it'll start spewing RAs. I've seen this, much to my horror. So you're going to want to do something here where if they're making one configuration change at a time, depending on what they're doing or how they're doing it, this will end poorly. So put some text in there about rate limiting how often people send out RAs. And then the other thing, I have real questions about this link local specific addresses on typical enterprise routers that I would like. I need to think about a little bit before I get back to you. I think that's going to be way harder than you think.
Well, on enterprise routers, it's easy because I rolled it out. It's just you configure that it's work. CPE when configure the link locals, yeah, automatically. Because for enterprise stuff, it's actually kind of what you can configure that now, right?
So that's my question: is if you don't configure it, what's going to happen? Like a lot of those enterprise routers do not have default link local addresses the same way. A user has to set them some way. So my question is they going to automatically make those link local addresses, or you expect somebody to actually go in and configure link local addresses for every prefix?
No, what I would like them, when you configure a prefix, it will start sending arrays from link local, which is specific to that prefix. If you change the prefix, it will change. So it will.
So the user is going to have to configure their own link local every time.
No, you don't need no. I'd like a router to generate link local based on prefix.
That is not normal in enterprise routers. They usually have some sort of config. Sometimes it is EUI64 is the thing they stick on the end, but it's not like a CPE, which magically has link local addresses. So I think you need to put some words in there.
Okay, we have a long queue, so let's.
I'll keep it short. Suresh Krishnan. So Jen, I like the text in the draft, but the stuff you showed on the slide, that's a difference. For the must immediately stuff, it doesn't comply with 4861, right? Like because
actually the text to update 4861.
No, the text you showed there, right? Yeah, I know. But like what 4861 does is like it has a desync with a random timer so that if there's like a power error or something, like all the arrays don't go at the same time. So like the word I'm objecting to is immediately, right? Because it's actually an algorithm specified with a max, I think it's called like max initial router address. So as long as you say like it do this, must do one with the algorithm specified for the initial becoming router interface, advertising interface, I'm good with that.
Okay, so maybe in this case we might want to reduce max this interval because I think 16 seconds is a way too long.
That's fine, but no, but the max initial router address interval is different than max router address.
Yeah, I know it's 16 seconds.
That's what I'm saying. You can
so like
recommend a smaller one. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay,
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
Lorenzo Colletti, the reason why routers send lots of router advertisements is that mobile nodes drop them. And so the more the mobile nodes drop them, the more routers have to send them. So sending one is not enough. I mean, I would not be standing here if I knew any other way, but like this is how it works. And so we do have to send a lot. I mean, I think Eric wrote code in, I don't know, 2016 that sends 5 arrays when like the Android hotspot changes prefixes, that's still there. One thing, a couple of points. This one here, I don't see a conflict. I mean, the intent of draft 6 Slack renum was like, don't send stuff that you forgot to send. Like, just please send everything that you have just to make sure that like nodes can make decisions. I don't think there's a conflict because if you put separate link local addresses, you can say, oh, please send everything that you sent before from this link local. And I think you can like resolve those. If you go back to the complicated slide with lots of text on it and lots of link local addresses, I do want to say, to what degree are we sort of like re-engineering the PVD option, right? Because like the PVD option was basically intended to do this. I know maybe we've given up on that option ever being deployed. I don't know. I do see the attractiveness of this because it'll just work and it'll trigger 5.5, but we did think that we would do this using PVD options. So that's something to think of.
The funny thing, actually, I do not think that 4861 I don't think anything prohibits us from doing this right now, right? So that's like, you can do it. Yeah, so that's why like I'm not even sure, like the first part, update of 4861 definitely belongs here. The part of sending arrays per prefix is actually might be pure v6 ops still draft, right? But it's only here because I found the text in Slack renum, which saying please send everything in one packet, and 4861 kind of saying router may put everything in one packet or may say different arrays. So because 4861 tends to mix protocol specification and router behavior, it's a kind of gray area where it should belong. But I'm happy to have that part in v6 ops clearly. Michael?
Michael Richardson, Mike. So I'm really so on the latter question, should you merge it? It sounds to me like maybe it would be good in renum. That may be just a simpler way since it's a relatively tiny bit. And as you say, we're kind of saying, are we saying the opposite? So my response is, yeah, let's just collect that together so that people can have a one kind of sane update. On the first point about kind of immediately send a thing, over in 6TiSH and roll, we made some effort to actually never send multicast RAs if we can ever avoid it, because it's so expensive on our radios. And we actually had things where we said, oh, actually, this thing that you did is implicitly an RS. Please unicast me back a unicast RA. So some layer 2 thingy happened, which implies that everyone knows what's going on, and please send me your RA unicast. So I'll think of some weasel words for your first slide that, will accommodate that, because what I don't want is, we don't want the update to actually ever produce a multicast RA on our network.
Yeah, I guess we basically get into a situation when IPv6 deployed in so many ways, right? So like enterprise network or like conference network will have completely different
correct
ND requirements. Yeah, so it's hard to make, almost impossible to make everyone happy, right? Because in my case, in data center network or in the office network, I want the change to be sent out immediately.
And on the northbound interface of my 6TiSH gateway, gosh, I really want that info too. Right? I want to receive it as quickly as possible, but I'm not going to tell anybody until they ask. And that's okay. That's what we want. So I'll think of some weasel words of how it works, and your text will wind up somewhere else, I guess. Thank you.
Good. Fernando is next.
Yes. Hi there. A couple of comments. So regarding the Slack renome document, so in the last revision, that was all, but last revision at the end of the day, like let's say the larger part of the document, the complex algorithm was removed. So the changes that remain are like few. So that should be possible to, I believe, to ship that document. What we do in Slack renome, or what we propose in Slack renome, was essentially to change the may that is in 4861 to should. Okay. So there might be, and we keep the rest of the text essentially, except for clarifications. Probably what you mean when you say like if information changes, is like the same thing as when the interface is reinitialized, and in that case, what you are suggesting in version 0 of your document is essentially a must versus the should that we have in Slack renome. If I remember correctly, the reason why we had the should rather than a must is not to make existing implementations all out of the sudden non-compliant. So the may and the should are more similar as opposed to just mandating a must. And so, if anything, I would argue to if the text is not there already, which I believe it is in Slack renome, to merge it. That's what I would propose, to merge it into Slack renome. When it comes to the other changes, I would believe, I haven't read the v6 ops document, but what I would say is that, if those are addresses that are going to be automatically configured, strictly speaking, that would be part of Slack. And as a result, that should be a 6-man document as opposed to a v6 ops document.
So basically, you're saying that, clarifying question, you're saying that the line between v6 ops and 6-man is that I am configuring those addresses using automation or manually versus routers auto-generate them?
I would say yes. Yes. So if they are addresses that are automatically configured, that would be Slack. Like formally speaking, that would be Slack. If what you are saying is that there would be, I don't know, like you're configuring the addresses with Ansible, whatever that is, that would be a different thing. But I believe that's not what you are suggesting, if I understand correctly.
I'm suggesting both. Currently, because if, for example, if I have VRRP, I'm already configuring addresses anyway. So I'm just configuring clink local manually based on the prefix. But I think it's for enterprise stuff, which normally configures stuff. If you do not configure them, you can generate them automatically. That's basically what V6 ops draft says. But let's take it offline because I don't think we have enough time to have this discussion.
Okay.
Jared?
Yep. Super quick. I think you are going to need multiple arrays. I'd really love to pack them in a PDU like BGP does with all the common attributes, but I think you're going to have multiple arrays.
Well, like how many prefixes you should have on the interface? Like 2, 3 maximum, right? Normally, unless you are very creative.
I see a lot. Yeah.
How does it work? It does not, right? It does not. Okay, I guess.
Hello, Mike Smith. Going to what Tim was saying about enterprise routers, and it's a long time since I've seen them, but one of the earliest reasons I heard it to configure link local addresses was a concern that because the link locals was derived from EUI 64s, you'd swap a router module and your link local would change. Right. 7217, we addressed that. So we made the link locals dependent on some line card slot or something else. So obviously implementation choice, whatever, but enterprise routers, if they follow RFC 8064, they should have link locals that are stable and can do your magic as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So
next one.
Want to spend time on all these or just skip?
Do we have time? What we doing time wise? Let's. Where shall we be on time? 40. We're on time.
We're sort of on time.
Okay, so now we do not have slide deck for the next. We do. Let me check. Do we have slide deck?
No, we don't.
We don't. Okay, so pay attention. Currently, there is an adoption call for NAT PT draft in the working group. We allocated a slot for that draft. However, none of the authors are able to attend this session. But I assume that everyone has read the draft before coming to the session, right? So we all know what we're talking about. So we do not need a presentation because it's been presented before and we all have read the draft. So we have 10 minutes for the discussion related to adoption. I would like to ask people when they state their support or the opposite, provide some justifications, because saying, yeah, I just like this work, it might not be. Oh, Nick. Nick, you don't have slides for this, no?
No, I wasn't planning to talk. But
okay, I'm just okay.
Oli wasn't here. I am willing to speak about this if you want me to, or I can just be quiet until the discussion happens and respond that way.
Yeah, so okay, in this case, let's proceed with the plan. Let's get feedback on the working group. And again, you indeed please send emails on the list as well, but because we have allocated the time, let's use it. So microphone is open for 8 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about this. Oh.
Sorry.
I'm not good at multitasking.
Brian?
Okay. Yep, here I am. I think we should adopt this because I think the alternative is worse. And I'm directly disagreeing with Ted Lemon here. I think if we publish it as an informational document, it will be a better and less damaging thing for the internet than if it either doesn't get published at all and we're left with an experimental RFC that people are using with, or if it's published as an independent submission, because if it's published as an independent submission, the experts who are supposed to be in this working group have no control whatever over the content. So I think the only rational approach is to publish it as an informational document, not endorse it on the standards track, but to be very clear about the why we're publishing it as informational.
Ted?
So Ted Lemon, I don't want to disagree too strongly with Brian here. I think he's making very good points. Certainly, I think that the experts here should update the document. We shouldn't just publish some random document that someone comes in with. But I feel like any sort of consensus on this document would be damaging. That is to say, I mean, if the IETF has consensus to publish a document, great. But I think that if the IETF had consensus to publish a document, it would result in more cases where NPTv6 would be implemented where it's not needed. And that's my concern. I think NPTv6 has some serious problems. I don't want it to become commonplace the way that NAT became commonplace. I think the market pressure for NPTv6 is way, way, way less than the market pressure for NAT. And so I don't think that we're at risk in the same way that we were for NAT. I think that a lot of the energy behind this is because people frankly have been badly burned by NAT. And so we're afraid of a repeat of that. I don't think we need to be that afraid. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. I'd really like us to just solve the problems that we need to solve. If NPTv6 solves, I haven't heard that it's genuinely solved a problem that I think it's the right way to solve that problem. So I don't think the working group should adopt this.
Lorenzo Colletti, I think, I mean, the status I would prefer over experimental is historic, okay. Now everyone's ruled me out because I'm a zealot. Okay, so I would definitely agree with Ted. I think this is actually it is actively harmful, and I have said on the list that what we do when we implement NAT as network operators, or we are moving cost, implementation cost, and support cost away from the network onto application developers and users. And those people aren't in this room, but we need to take their interests into account. So we sort of, I suppose the closest we get to that is folks like Ted and myself coming here as OS implementers saying, no, this is not okay for our users. So things, while NPTv6 is kind of like more stateless than that, it is actually still very damaging for application developers. One thing that you can't do, for example, is if you don't know your own IP address, you can't build a peer-to-peer app, right? So it's actually very painful for app developers and not something I think we should inflict on them. Now, the reasons that have been given for this needing to be deployed now are essentially two of the last remaining problems that we still have not yet solved in IPv6 deployment land, and they are basically this SME multi-homing problem and the renumbering problem. And I think we just haven't gotten to those problems yet. It's not because we don't want to solve them, but before that we had to solve residential. Then we had to solve mobile. Now we're solving enterprise, right? With IPv6 mostly kind of. Maybe we even make this grand bargain with DHCPD, and we put the Slack versus DHCPv6 debate behind us using PD, and like the last two problems, we will get to them, right? 5.5 in Linux is coming. The Mac OS, iOS, and Windows already do it, and that kind of does solve multi-homing. I also want to point out that if we solve multi-homing using something like this, we're going to give up the ability to use something like MP-Quick to do better multi-homing than we can possibly ever do using even NAT4.4 style. We need to do better than what we did in IPv4, and we have that within reach. We just need to wait a little bit longer to let those solutions get into the market. And in the SME space, we don't have that pressure right now. We need to wait a little bit longer.
Lorenzo, thank you. We need to move this all.
Can I respond to a couple of these things?
No, actually, we don't have time. But I'd like to hear from the other people in the queue. So Tommy?
Sure, I'll be quick. Tommy Jensen, third client OS in queue, I guess. There are times to publish manuals for foot guns to prioritize tow order. I don't think this is one of them because they will have long repercussions that we'll be stuck with. And like Lorenzo said, we're so close. And I say that as, showing up with in V6 Ops saying, hey, we're going to do that thing Android did 10 years ago, right? Like, we're all moving. And our customers will look at the informational. Just kidding. No, they won't. They'll see an RFC and then ask us to do it.
There already is an RFC. Okay, Nick?
Okay, so as one of the people that is co-authoring this and the person that actually prodded the original folks to to be involved, I think there is validity to some of the things that people are saying here. I think that it's being inflated a little bit. So there is an actual problem with the draft that this update addresses, and that is the ICMP error handling. So some of that is fixed. Actually, that is fixed in the update. However, if looking through some of the criteria for what the status is, and I did put a lot of this on the list that I would encourage people to go and read. We need to answer a handful of questions. If this is experimental, what defines success? So we went ahead and defined what we thought success looked like and evaluated against that. If that's not agreed upon, then we can go and reevaluate those things. I also think that while this does solve some multi-homing problems, this is a tool that has very niche uses, and it is useful for those things. One of them being, rewriting the addresses for things like unified threat management devices that may not handle asymmetric traffic well. So the fear, I think, from what I'm hearing, is fairly obvious, is that this will blow up like NAT44 did. I think if we word it correctly, then we minimize that to the point where it's already at, right? It doesn't really get any bigger. And if you look through the way that that my understanding of the way that the categories fit, it really fits. It should, if defined as a successful experiment, then it should be changed to either informational or historic. I don't think it meets standard. People may argue that it does. I think Oli might think that it needs to be as a standard. I think it probably meets informational just based on the reading of the criteria of
Okay,
what those.
thank you. We're out of time and have two people in the queue. So Torlis and Jared, let's go quickly.
Right. I think it might be useful for you folks to check out the use cases in industrial, coming from static IPv4 netting, which is used extremely much to build large machinery. We don't have an IPv6 solution for that. I don't think I've heard from Lorenzo's explanation anything to the contrary. As far as the counter position is concerned, I would really love to see a good summary of the counter position, because obviously if we can live without net, it would be great, but trying to find it from many places. So please, put a summary section opposing view. But then again, I'm looking for the industrial cases, so I'd love to see what the best solution for them is. Thanks.
Okay, Jared?
Yeah, I'll try and be as quick as possible. Basically, +1, 95%. 98% of what Lorenzo said. I really see these types of things important for not only enterprise multi-homing, but I think if we even look at the earlier stuff about, when to use link local and stuff like that and how to actually configure devices, I think it's unlikely that people are going to be able to use IPv6 to natively configure many of their devices because of MDNS name collisions and discovery issues around that, absent, us possibly giving a supported way to do, this or NAT66. So just.
Okay, thank you. Torlis, I think you're next.
Okay. What's his title number? The title, presentation title, consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello. So this isn't a draft yet,
And you have 8 minutes.
Yeah, asking to be adopted, or just a discussion about, if or how could we get there. So I'm trying to represent a small oppressed minority of people who think that 8-bit for QoS for the whole internet of billions of people is not good enough, right? We have overused, abused, reused, and messed around with DSCP and ECN bits, and those 8 bits are just not enough. And so, especially with the wonderful extension header, a draft that we all need to review and shepherd and everything. Hopefully, there should be a better way out of this situation to allow much more, experimentation, deployment, and so of more advanced, newer QS mechanisms. But it's not really, I think, sufficient to wait for an individual working group to come up with a particular proposal. But I think we also need to think about how we create a framework in the extensions headers that we could have. Next slide. So yeah, yada yada, a lot of things from the six-man perspective, where I have these questions in terms of hop by hop header, destination header. So I've written a lot of these questions up. So if you're really interested to help, please come to and talk to me about that. That would be lovely. From the .NET perspective, next slide. We are currently in the process of evaluating a lot of possible, improved controlled latency mechanisms that would need, additional metadata and packets beyond the 8 bits that we have in the TOS field. And they would all be different. And we do know how difficult high-speed hardware and everything is. So the more commonality we have in these solutions in the packetization, the better it would be. Now, there is no consensus at all what, how, and if to adopt in .NET. So this is really trying just to parallelize the work we're doing in .NET with the better understanding of what would we be allowed by six-man standards to do in the packet header. So next slide. So the idea was, can we come up with a single header, extension header, or even two, right? One hop by hop, one destination option header, creating a new registry, making it a lot easier to be extensible, while also commonalizing the parsing so that multiple different mechanisms do not incur the same initial cost to try to figure out if all the hardware that we have in the field can support them. Right, so there is basically method, which would be registry. Then we figure out what are subparts of the registry for standards adoption, informational, and so on. Right, I've even in the draft have a configured way. Right, so that basically would allow us to have a common approach and then leave the actual details of the mechanisms to other working groups, like in the same way we did with DSCP, which mostly has been done in TSVWG and a few other working groups when new ones have been adopted. But now for, let's say, 64-bit of additional QS data. Next slide. So destination option, very same idea about that. So that's basically the discussion point, hop by hop, and destination option header. Next slide. So this is basically for folks from six-man who don't want to go to .NET and get killed by strange algorithms, getting a little bit of an idea what would be potentially. None of these have been endorsed by .NET, right? This is all what different authors feel are good algorithms, sometimes really with high-speed testing, right? So you see parameters like a service rate, finish time, cycle numbers, deviation. So it's basically all about the scheduling of packets in a stateless fashion, hop by hop, to achieve better QS outcomes than we can do with the current mechanisms, especially also in large-scale networks. Next slide. Right, and now we're coming mostly from .NET. In the past, I've seen a lot of interest. We've got as early as 2000, Ian Stoiker coming here and trying to present his really breakthrough work in QS, and the draft was great, but then the header for IPv6 just go away, right? So I think this is not limited to .NET, but I think hopefully we'll also find over time more interested people from the congestion control side. And I think there are a lot of congestion control problems that haven't been resolved because we have such a big backlog, right? So better upspeeding, for example, better AQM feedback. So that would all benefit from more than the, well, 2 bits we actually have for ECN, right? Which we're already way overtaxing with L4S. Next slide. Right, so there were 2 great discussion points from Tim Chown and Tom Herbert. So I've been trying to summarize this here, but I don't want to go into all these details, but that's going to be feedback I'm going to put into the next version of the draft. But yeah, high level, this is a discussion trying to see, what the chance do we stand if we would basically take the next step and basically write a draft with such, a new registry, fixed size, extension headers in support of QoS, with all the mandatory requirements in there to constrain it to the purpose, so that in the same way that DSCP was a header field given up to the QoS people, we as six-men could give up, let's say, these 64 bits to the QoS world to build better QoS algorithms for our networks. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Greg is in the queue.
Greg Mirsky Erickson. So yes, thank you for pointing out that the DetNet does not, the slide with DetNet perspective does not reflect the DetNet working group agreement.
Yes.
So that's very important because otherwise it's misrepresentation. Another thing is that I would like to point out, the QoS for DetNet has been discussed, and there's, at least for the adopted solutions over the IP data plane and MPLS data plane, there is no apparent agreement that anything that beyond the existing class of service markings is required. It seems that might be what you are referring to is not really QoS, but network resource partitioning identification. And there are still ongoing discussions, but they are outside of DetNet working group. DetNet is not really right now interested in these discussions. So I don't really see that how this, at least from the adopted by the DetNet working group documents is relevant to DetNet.
So as I try to explain.
So we're really out of time. Let's get Tom, have Tom in the queue
Thank you.
make a quick comment, and then we'll close up. Tom?
Hi, thanks for this work. I just wanted to point out, I posted a draft today, which is a little bit of a generalization of this. It would encompass both host to network and network to host signaling, and also reflection. Please take a look at it, and we can maybe discuss it on the list. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're done. Our apologies to the people in the time allowed section. We did not have time, but your presentations will be in the proceedings, and I hope to see everyone in Vancouver and lots of discussion on the mailing list. So thank you. Good.
Good.
Sorry, my coffee caught up with me.
No, it's yeah.
Did sort of manage to get through everything.
Survived.
But so we'll have. So I guess. So our big project will be to still to get the reviewers and see if anyone signs up.
Yeah, so Rich was willing to chef this one, right? I mean,
Oh, good.
I think he did.
He would be
So,
good.
yeah, so he will. Yeah, and if anyone will like, if find review is fine. If not, allocate.
So we should have a chat with him to get him up. Just the same conversation we had with everyone. So
Okay.
that would be good.
Thanks for the info. 我是要把清华100看了，看了主要是classification, right? Yeah, that's not best level. Next time we will prepare all we can chat on
We can find the things that